Okay, so in our last video, I just outlined this for us in a Punnett square about that probability of having a male or a female in any given pregnancy. And it was 50-50%. So our top two boxes here in the Punnett square showed two females with two X chromosomes, and the bottom two showed two males with an X and a Y chromosome. So here's that kind of sex inheritance pattern that we saw, where when it comes to mom's sex chromosome, if a female child is to be born, she will be giving one of her X chromosomes. And the same thing with dad. He's going to be giving his X chromosome. In order for a male to be born, mom is going to give an X chromosome, and dad is going to give a Y chromosome. Because of this pattern, it's often said that males are that determining factor in gender. Okay, so it's based off of if the dad is going to give a second X, or if he's going to end up giving that Y chromosome. Okay, so far when looking at that Punnett square, like I said before, it probably looks really close to Mendelian genetics. Right, the Punnett square seems similar. We have both of those chromosomes being passed to the offspring in that equal chance, just like we saw with the alleles in Mendelian genetics. That difference between those two, again, is because of the difference in the type of chromosomes versus males and females. And the fact that males and females are actually going to be affected differently when it comes to the inheritance. Okay, now, not sure if that fully came out exactly as I wanted it to, but males and females, when we look at specific disorders that are sex-linked, they're going to be affected differently. So the types of sex-linked inheritance that we're going to be looking at are X-linked recessive, X-linked dominant, and Y-linked. Okay, X-linked referring to the X chromosome, so genes that are on the X chromosome, and Y-linked referring to genes that are on the male Y chromosome. Now, I say down here how, again, males and females are going to be affected differently or unequally because of them having different sex chromosomes. As a quick overview, before we get into all the details, we're going to point out that when it comes to an X-linked recessive trait, sorry males, but that's going to affect you more. Okay, proportionally, it's going to affect males more. X-linked dominant, sorry females, but that's going to proportionally affect you more. And then, of course, Y-linked, that's only going to affect males. Okay, because they are the only ones that have that Y chromosome. So before we dive deeper, we have to quickly go over some vocabulary. First one being genetic disorder. So a genetic disorder is an illness caused by an abnormality, so mutation, in the chromosome. Okay, and of course, for now, we're talking about the sex chromosomes. We're also going to be looking at the difference between an affected individual and an unaffected individual. So a person who gets the genetic disorder versus the person who doesn't get the genetic disorder. And that unaffected individual can be a carrier. They are not affected by the disorder, but they do have the affected allele and can actually pass that on to their offspring. Okay, these three will make so much more sense after we go over that first pattern of inheritance, So let's take a look at X-linked recessive. Again, we're talking about a gene that is in the X chromosome. Okay, X-linked. And that gene's going to be a recessive gene. Okay, so the individuals that end up getting the disorder, it's because they have 2 copies of that allele, because it's a recessive disorder. You need to have 2 copies. And I say that just because of our current understanding of recessive, but we'll see here how that affects males differently versus females. So if we were to just focus on this left-hand side here, we have a carrier mother and an unaffected father. So the unaffected father, he does not have the disorder. And to put a name to this said disorder, we could use something like colorblindness, because that is X-linked recessive. So the unaffected father is not going to have colorblindness. Now the carrier mother, she does have a copy of that affected allele in blue, and that's why she's this light blue color. But she's a carrier. She does not display that phenotype of being affected, of having the disorder. So she herself also does not have the disorder. And that's because she has a copy of the dominant normal allele. The only way she could get the disorder is if she had a second copy of that affected allele. What she can do is pass that allele on to her offspring. And we can see here she could pass on the unaffected allele to an unaffected son. She could pass on the unaffected allele to an unaffected daughter. But she could also pass on this affected allele to either a daughter or a son. Now you'll notice that big color difference here between the dark blue and the light blue. And that's because our son here, he has the disorder. Okay? Males only have one X chromosome. So they don't have that fail-safe, is what I'm going to call it, of having a second X. They can't rely on getting a second, like, unaffected allele. If they happen to get the affected allele, they are going to show that phenotype. They'll have that disorder regardless of the fact that they only have one copy. Okay, because it's only that recessive allele. The carrier daughter, she got one copy of the affected allele from mom, but dad, of course, his X chromosome, it was unaffected. So she is a carrier. She is not going to have symptoms of the disorder. She would not have color blindness. But if she were to have kids, she can pass that on to her offspring. in order for this daughter to be affected, to have color blindness, she would have had to have gotten a second copy of the affected allele from dad. So she would have had to have gotten both copies from her parents. Okay, so that leads me to this question of, can men be carriers for a X-linked recessive disorder? No, they can't. And honestly, they can't be carriers for any of these. And that's because they only have one X and they have one Y. Regardless if the allele that they got was dominant or recessive, they'll get one copy of it, and that's the phenotype that they'll possess and show. Okay, so if they got a big A here, that dominant allele, they would have the dominant phenotype of normal. But if they get the recessive allele, then they are going to have the recessive phenotype of color blindness. So men only have one X chromosome, so what they get, that's their phenotype. Females, on the other hand, they have that safety measure of having a second X chromosome. So in order for them to have the disorder, to have color blindness, they would need to have two of these lowercase alleles, two of the recessive alleles. Otherwise, like in this case, if they have a dominant allele, you'll see the dominant trait of normal. So let's look at this with a specific disorder. And what we'll use here is hemophilia. So hemophilia, again, another X-linked recessive disease, and it's where your blood won't clot. Okay, so any cut that they have, they are missing the clotting factors that they need in order for them to immediately clot. Instead, they're going to bleed for longer. When we're looking at the alleles for this, we're going to be using big H and little h. Again, in order for a female to have the disorder, they're going to need to have two little h's. And for males, they're going to need to have that one little h, and then they will get hemophilia. Okay, so we're going to work on a Punnett square, and we're going to use our whiteboard. Okay, so I'm going to set up our Punnett square. And I'm going to get my drawing tool. And I'm going to write out our X chromosomes for mom up here, and our X and Y for dad. And then I'm going to say, what if mom wasn't affected by hemophilia and actually had two dominant alleles on her X chromosomes? But dad did have hemophilia, so he has that one recessive X. We won't write anything on Y because this is an X-linked gene. Okay, so nothing here with Y. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop this video and I'll start a new one.